Hi everyone, welcome back to RB Insights. This is Dr. Ruby and today we are exploring the life and ideas of Kurt Koffka, one of the founders of Gestalt psychology. His work is a key part of the UGC net education syllabus. So if you are preparing for this exam or if you are just interested in understanding psychology and learning, this topic is essential. Koffka was an influential thinker who expanded Gestalt psychology beyond perception to include learning and child development. Today, I'll guide you through his life, his theory, and why his ideas still matter in education today. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to RB Insights and check out other playlists where we simplify important educational topics and exam preparation materials. In today's class, we will learn about Kurt Koffka, an overview and principles of his theory. Finally, the impact of this theory on learning and psychology. Let us start by learning a bit about who Kurt Koffka was. Kurt Koffka was born in 1886 in Berlin, Germany. He grew up interested in psychology and eventually studied philosophy and psychology at the University of Berlin. Koffka earned his doctorate focusing on perception and cognitive processes. His academic career took off as he began working with two other influential psychologists, Max Wertheimer and Wolfgang Kohler. Together, they developed what we now call Gestalt psychology, a theory focused on how we perceive and organize information as unified wholes rather than isolated pieces. One of Koffka's most important contributions was his 1935 book, Principles of Gestalt Psychology, which helped spread Gestalt's idea to English-speaking audiences, especially in the US. This book covered not only perception but also how we learn, understand, and develop mentally. In 1924, Koffka moved to the US and began teaching at Smith College in Massachusetts, where he continued his research until his death in 1941. Koffka's work showed that our brains don't process information like machines. Instead, they organize experiences into patterns. He applied this to education by arguing that learning is holistic and meaningful when we see the whole picture. So, Koffka wasn't just a psychologist, he was an educator who shaped how we think about learning and development. Now, let us dive into an overview of Koffka's theory, which helps explain how we understand the world. Koffka believed that our brains naturally group information into wholes or patterns. He described this idea with the famous phrase, "The whole is different from the sum of its parts." This means that when we look at something, like a picture, a scene, or even a problem, we try to understand the complete image or idea instead of focusing on each small part individually. Let us consider an example. Imagine you are at a concert. You don't just hear separate sound from each instrument. You hear the complete music. The drums, guitar, vocals, and other instruments come together to create a unified experience, which we call the song. This way of experiencing things as unified wholes rather than isolated elements is the foundation of Koffka's theory and Gestalt psychology. Koffka also applied this holistic approach to learning. He argued that when we learn something new, it is easier to understand if we can see how it connects to what we already know. Learning becomes meaningful when we see the whole picture rather than memorizing individual details. This big picture thinking is something that has influenced how we approach education today, encouraging students to connect ideas instead of simply learning facts in isolation. Now, let us go through some of the key principles Koffka introduced to explain his theory. These principles will help us understand how our brains naturally organize information and how these processes can make learning more effective. Point number 1, whole versus part. Koffka argued that seeing the whole gives meaning to each part. Think of a book. Instead of focusing on each word, we read sentences and paragraphs to understand the overall story. Each sentence builds onto the previous one to create the whole story. Similarly, in a classroom, it is easier to understand a lesson when we can see how each point connects to the bigger concept. This principle suggests that understanding the whole concept makes learning the details much easier. Point number 2, perceptual organization. Koffka said that our brains are naturally wired to organize information into patterns. Imagine being in a crowded room. You might notice that people who are dressed similarly or standing close together seems like a group, even if they are strangers. This is your brain's way of organizing information to make it easier to process quickly. Koffka believed that this helps us make sense of complex situations without having to focus on each detail individually. Next, field theory. Koffka believed that our field or environment influences how we learn. For example, if you are trying to study in a calm, quiet place, you will find it easier to focus and absorb information. However, if you are studying in a noisy or stressful environment, it is much harder. This principle reminds us that learning is not only about the material itself, it is also about the environment in which we learn. Next, schema development. Koffka's ideas of schemas or mental models is also essential. Think of schemas as mental folders where we store similar information. For example, if you know how to solve a specific type of math problem, it becomes easier to learn similar problems because your brain has a schema or folder for it. Each time you learn something new in that area, it is like adding information to that folder, which speeds up the learning process. All these principles together give us insight into how we naturally understand the world. By seeing patterns, focusing on whole concepts, and organizing our knowledge, we make learning a meaningful, connected process. Now finally, let us talk about how Koffka's theory impacts education and psychology. Starting with point number 1, holistic learning. Koffka's idea encourages teachers and students to focus on the big picture in learning. This means connecting individual lessons to broader concepts, making learning more engaging and meaningful. For example, in history, we don't just memorize dates. We look at how events connect over time to understand the full story. Point number 2, contextual learning. According to Koffka's theory, learning is influenced by our surroundings. Teachers can create positive learning environments by ensuring that classrooms are supportive and free of distractions. This makes it easier for students to engage with the material deeply and retain information. Next, developmental psychology. Koffka applied Gestalt's ideas to child development, showing that children understand the world by connecting patterns and relationships rather than focusing on isolated facts. This approach helps teachers design activities that build connections and make learning fun and interactive for young children. So Koffka's theory has had a lasting impact on education by encouraging a connected, holistic view of learning. His focus on the whole picture has changed how educators approach teaching and how students engage with their studies. By looking beyond isolated details and understanding patterns, students develop stronger, more meaningful knowledge. So there was all in today's class on Kurt Koffka and Gestalt psychology. I hope you liked the video. Please let me know in the comments section if you have any questions regarding this theory. Also remember to like, subscribe and share. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next class.